The first time he told me I wasn't smart enough, he smiled while saying it. That's the part that stayed with me. We were sitting across from each other in a glass-walled conference room that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and ambition. He leaned back in his chair, fingers folded over his stomach, looking at me the way people look at something they've already decided about. I was 20, too freshly graduated, nervous in the way that still believed effort could fix anything. "You have great instincts," he said gently, as if preparing me for a compliment. Then he tilted his head. "But this industry, it requires a kind of mind you either have or you don't, and honestly, I don't think you do." I nodded. I don't know why I nodded. Maybe because I trusted him. Maybe because I wanted to believe he was protecting me from disappointment. He had been my mentor for 3 years by then, my guide through internships, late, night project reviews, quiet encouragement when others dismissed me as too soft or too emotional for tech. He was also close to my family, close enough to sit at our dinner table, close enough to advise my parents about my future, close enough to become a voice that carried more weight than my own. After that conversation, he stopped assigning me meaningful work. I noticed it slowly. Projects that once came to my desk were redirected elsewhere. Meetings happened without me. Feedback turned vague, careful, almost distant. "You'd be happier in something safer," he told me one afternoon, not meeting my eyes. "This field can be brutal. I don't want to see you get hurt." I smiled and thanked him. I always thanked him. At home, my parents echoed his words without realizing where they came from. "Maybe he's right," my mother said softly while washing dishes. "He knows the industry." My father didn't say much, he just nodded. Silence can be louder than doubt when it comes from someone you want approval from. My younger sister, though, she became the contrast, the one he praised openly, the one he introduced to people as the future. She was sharper, more confident, less hesitant to speak over others. Everything I wasn't yet. At her graduation party, he gave a toast about believing in potential. He never came to mine. I told myself it didn't matter. That belief didn't build careers. Work did. Still, something small and painful settled into my chest. Not anger, not even sadness, just a quiet awareness that trust, once cracked, never fully seals again. I stayed longer than I should have. I worked harder than anyone asked me to. I learned to listen instead of speak, to observe instead of argue. When you're told you're not enough long enough, you either disappear, or you become very still. I became still. I noticed how praise moved in patterns, how opportunity followed loyalty more than talent, how some doors closed quietly, while others were never meant for you in the first place. I noticed how often he took credit for ideas that weren't entirely his, how decisions were made behind closed doors, then explained later as inevitabilities. He never raised his voice, he never insulted me outright again. He didn't have to. His belief, or lack of it, was everywhere. The day I finally left, he shook my hand and wished me luck. "You'll do fine," he said kindly. "Just don't be too hard on yourself if it doesn't work out." I walked out of the building with a box of notebooks and a calm smile. Inside, something had already shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to change the direction of my life. I didn't prove him wrong right away. I didn't even try to. I went quiet. I took a smaller job at a startup no one had heard of. I learned everything slowly, thoroughly, without needing permission. I failed privately. I grew without witnesses. I stopped explaining myself to people who had already decided who I was. Years passed like that, quiet years, honest ones. By the time my name appeared on industry panels, by the time people asked for my opinion instead of offering it, I had almost forgotten the sound of his voice. Almost, then yesterday, an email landed in my inbox, a partnership request from his company, addressed to the CEO. To me, and as I stared at the screen, I realized something with a strange sense of calm. Some words never leave you, but they also don't get to define the ending. I didn't reply to the email right away, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I finally understood the power of waiting. In the past, I would have rushed eager, grateful, careful not to offend. Silence used to scare me. It felt like abandonment. Now it felt like clarity. I reread the message slowly, polite, strategic, almost warm. He hadn't written it himself, of course. A business development director had. But his name was there, woven into every line like a quiet assumption. We still know each other. This will be easy. I closed my laptop and went for a walk. Success doesn't arrive with fireworks the way movies promise. It arrives quietly in habits that don't feel impressive while you're building them. Mine arrived through long nights, uncomfortable conversations, and the discipline of not needing applause. I had learned to trust my work instead of the people evaluating it. Still, the email stirred something old. That evening my mother called. She hadn't called in weeks. I heard something interesting today. She said carefully, "Your mentor's company is struggling. There are rumors of layoffs." I hummed in response, letting her fill the space. And she added, "Someone mentioned your name. Apparently, you're doing very well." There it was. The pause after very well. The place where pride and regret wrestle quietly. "I'm okay," I said. She exhaled, relieved. "We always knew you would be." I didn't correct her, not out of bitterness, but out of understanding. People rewrite their memories to survive them. My parents weren't cruel. They were afraid of instability, afraid of disappointment, afraid that loving me meant risking being wrong. After we hung up, I sat with that truth longer than I expected to. The pain wasn't sharp anymore. It was dull, familiar, the kind that doesn't ask for attention, only acknowledgement. I thought about him then. My mentor, how carefully he had guided me away from the center, how he had framed doubt as protection, how he had never once asked what I wanted, only what he thought I could handle. There's a particular kind of betrayal that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't scream or shatter. It settles in quietly, convincing you that your smallness is natural, that your hesitation is wisdom, that your silence is maturity. It took years to unlearn that. At my company, I had built a culture around listening. Not the performative kind, but the kind that changes decisions. I hired people who had been overlooked. I trusted instincts that didn't come wrapped in confidence. I had learned, painfully, that brilliance doesn't always arrive loudly. The night before the meeting request became public knowledge, my sister sent me a message. "Did you know they're trying to partner with your company?" I stared at her words, unsure what I felt. She had benefited from the comparisons, even if she never asked for them. But she had also lived in their shadow. Praise can be its own kind of pressure. "Yes," I replied, "I saw." A moment passed, then, "Are you nervous?" I smiled, not because it was funny, but because it wasn't true. "No," I typed, "just thoughtful." That was the truth. I wasn't rehearsing speeches or planning triumphs. I wasn't imagining his face when he realized who sat across from him. That kind of satisfaction fades quickly. What stayed with me instead was a quieter question. What do I owe the version of myself who believed him? The answer came without drama. I owed her honesty. I owed her boundaries. I owed her a future where respect wasn't negotiated. I opened the email again the next morning, read it once more, then forwarded it to my executive assistant with a simple note: schedule the meeting. Standard process, no special treatment, no emotional shortcuts. Later that day, I stood by my office window and watched the city move below people rushing, hoping, failing, trying again. I remembered the girl who nodded when she was told she wasn't enough, the one who said thank you when doors closed quietly in front of her. She didn't need revenge. She needed peace, and peace, I had learned, comes from seeing clearly, not from being seen. The meeting was set for the following week, and for the first time I wasn't preparing to be judged. I was simply showing up as myself. The days leading up to the meeting were ordinary in the best way. I reviewed reports, signed off on hiring decisions, argued gently over product timelines. Life didn't pause to honor old wounds, and I was grateful for that. Years ago, I would have replayed every memory, every sentence he ever said to me, polishing them into something sharp enough to hurt back. Now those memories sat quietly, like books I had already read and didn't need to open again. Growth rarely announces itself. It just shows up one day and surprises you with how steady you've become. I remembered the early years after I left. How invisible I felt starting over. No mentor, no reputation, just a small desk in a loud office, and the humbling realization that potential means nothing without patience. I made mistakes then. I trusted people too quickly. I worked too long without rest. I cried in bathrooms and told no one. But I also learned. I learned how to listen to my own discomfort instead of dismissing it, how to notice when someone praised me publicly but undermined me privately, how to say no without apology. Those lessons didn't come from success. They came from being ignored long enough to hear myself think. When my company began to grow, I resisted the urge to prove anything. I didn't talk about where I came from or who had doubted me. I didn't need a villain to justify my story. I focused on building something that felt honest, sustainable. Human people noticed that. They noticed that I asked questions instead of dominating rooms, that I paused before deciding, that I remembered names. Respect, I learned, doesn't come from being impressive. It comes from being consistent. 2 nights before the meeting, my father came by unexpectedly. He stood in my office lobby, hands folded behind his back, looking older than I remembered. "I won't stay long," he said. We sat. The silence between us wasn't hostile, it was careful. "I heard about the partnership request," he said finally. "I didn't realize how far you'd gone." I nodded, letting him speak if he wanted to. "I should have asked more questions back then," he added. "I trusted other people's opinions instead of yours." It wasn't an apology, but it was close enough to the truth to matter. "I'm okay," I said gently, and I meant it. When he left, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt lighter, not because he acknowledged me, but because I no longer needed him to. The night before the meeting, I reviewed the agenda once. Then I closed my laptop early. I made tea. I stood by the window and watched the city settle into itself. There was no knot in my stomach, no rehearsed lines. Just a quiet readiness. I thought again about the younger version of me, the one who mistook silence for safety, who believed that being agreeable was the same as being respected. She had survived by staying small. I honored her for that, but she wasn't driving anymore. The morning of the meeting, I chose a simple outfit. No power colors, no armor. I didn't need to look formidable. I needed to be clear. As I walked into the conference room, I caught my reflection in the glass wall. I looked calm, not detached, not cold, just present. I realized then that my strength didn't come from outgrowing him. It came from outgrowing the version of myself that needed his belief. The partnership proposal was solid on paper. His company needed resources, stability, credibility. We offered all 3, but partnerships, like trust, aren't built on need alone. They're built on alignment. I knew what questions I would ask. I knew what boundaries I would hold. And I knew deeply that whatever decision came next would not cost me my peace. For the first time, I wasn't walking into a room hoping to be chosen. I was walking in knowing I already had, and that knowledge, quiet, earned, unshakable, was everything he never saw coming. He arrived early. I knew it before I saw him. There's a certain tension that enters a room when someone carries expectation instead of curiosity. I was already seated at the head of the table, reviewing notes I didn't really need. The door opened softly, and when he stepped inside, he paused just long enough for recognition to settle. His expression didn't change much. He was always good at that. But his eyes did, widening slightly, then steadying themselves, as if this outcome had always been possible, and he'd simply forgotten to imagine it. "Good morning," I said, standing. My voice didn't shake. "Good morning." He replied after a brief hesitation. I didn't realize, I'm sure, I said gently and gestured for everyone to sit. We spoke about numbers first. Projections, infrastructure, long-term viability. I listened carefully, asked precise questions, and let the room breathe between answers. He spoke confidently at first, leaning into habits that once impressed me. But confidence doesn't carry the same weight when it isn't anchored in certainty. When he finished presenting, I closed the folder in front of me. This partnership, I said, would require transparency, shared decision-making, and mutual respect. He nodded quickly. "Of course, that's exactly what we're looking for." I met his eyes then, not with challenge, not with triumph, but with honesty. "In the past," I continued, "I learned a great deal under your guidance. Some of it was technical, some of it was personal." The room went still. "I've built this company with intention," I said. "We don't enter relationships out of urgency, we enter them out of alignment." He swallowed. "I understand." And I believed that he did, not because he was humbled, but because he was listening now in a way he never had before. "I'll need time to consider." I concluded. "You'll hear from my team." The meeting ended without drama. No confrontation, no explanations demanded. He thanked me. I thanked him back. As he turned to leave, he stopped. "You've done remarkable work," he said quietly. I was wrong. I nodded once. "We all miss things when we're certain," I replied. That was all. After the room emptied, I stayed seated for a moment longer, not to savor anything, but to notice how calm I felt. No racing heart, no rehearsed victory, just stillness. Later that evening, I walked home instead of taking the car. The city lights reflected softly on the pavement, and I thought about how far I had traveled without anyone noticing. How often growth looks like absence before it looks like success. At home, I poured a glass of water and sat by the window. I didn't call my parents. I didn't post anything. I didn't relive the meeting. Some moments aren't meant to be shared. They're meant to be kept. A week later, I declined the partnership. The email was respectful, clear. "Kind, we weren't aligned," I said. I wished them well. There was no reply, and that, too, was okay. What I felt wasn't satisfaction. It was closure. Not the kind that comes from being seen, but the kind that comes from seeing clearly. I understood now that emotional justice isn't about reversing roles. It's about stepping out of them entirely. I hadn't needed to be louder, or sharper, or more impressive than he expected. I had needed to become someone who trusted herself. That night, I slept deeply. No dreams, no echoes of old words. Just rest. The girl who once nodded at doubt had grown into a woman who chose her peace. And that quiet, steady, unclaimed, was the success that mattered most.